Inside the pocket of Julian's Tom Ford suit, I found a receipt for a diamond necklace worth $250,000 marked as a business gift. Yet there it was, glittering around the neck of his 24-year-old assistant at our 15th anniversary gala. They stripped me of my empire, but they forgot one thing. That receipt was not just proof of an affair. It was the detonator that would destroy everything the Sterling family owned. My name is Elena Vance, and tonight was supposed to be the coronation of my 15-year reign as the creative soul of Sterling Developments. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the penthouse suite of the Apex, the billion-dollar skyscraper that had started as a rough sketch on my drafting table. My reflection showed a woman composed in emerald silk, but my hands were trembling as I clutched a crumpled piece of paper I had pulled from Julian's jacket pocket an hour ago. It was a receipt from Cartier for a necklace dubbed the Blue Hope. The price tag read $250,000. The note attached to the purchase order said simply, "Business gift." When I had confronted Julian while he adjusted his bow tie, he did not even blink. "It is for the wife of the Al-Fayed investor." "Elena," he had said, smoothing his lapels with infuriating calmness. "She loves sapphires. It is purely diplomatic. You know how much this merger means to the family. Do not be jealous. It does not suit you." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. I took a breath, composed my face into the mask of the perfect corporate wife, and descended the grand staircase into the ballroom. The room was a sea of black ties and designer gowns, buzzing with the elite of New York. Then I saw them. Julian was standing near the champagne fountain, laughing. Next to him was Bella, his 24-year-old personal assistant who had been promoted just last month. She was wearing a dress that was far too expensive for her salary, but that was not what stopped my heart. Resting against her collarbone, glittering under the chandeliers, was the Blue Hope. The sapphires were unmistakable. The room seemed to tilt. The diplomatic gift for a Dubai matriarch was currently draped around the neck of a woman young enough to be Julian's daughter. Rage, cold and sharp, replaced my shock. I marched across the marble floor, ignoring the greetings of board members. I stopped right in front of them. Bella's smile faltered, her hand instinctively going to the necklace. "That is a lovely piece." "Bella," I said, my voice dangerously steady. "Did Julian tell you it was intended for the Al-Fayed deal? Or did he skip that part of the lie Julian stepped between us?" His face hardening. He did not look guilty. He looked annoyed. "Elena, stop this," he hissed, grabbing my arm tight enough to bruise. "You are making a scene." "I am making a scene." I laughed, the sound brittle. "You bought your mistress a $250,000 necklace with our money on our 15th anniversary. Take it off her. Julian, now." Suddenly, the music seemed to stop. People were staring. Julian released my arm and straightened his jacket, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You are hysterical," Julian said, loudly enough for the surrounding circle of investors to hear. "God, Elena, you have been so paranoid lately. It is embarrassing. Look at yourself. You are old, tired, and imagining things." Before I could slap him, a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. It was Arthur Sterling, my father-in-law. I turned to him, expecting support. I had built this company's reputation. I was family. "Arthur, look at what he is doing," I pleaded. Arthur looked at me with eyes like flint. "I see exactly what is happening. You are unstable. Elena, you are damaging the integrity of this launch." He signaled to the security team hovering at the perimeter. "You are relieved of your duties as design director, effective immediately." I froze. "You cannot fire me. I am a partner. I own half of our assets." Julian let out a short, cruel laugh. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "You own nothing. Remember those papers you signed 6 months ago, the restructuring for tax purposes. You signed over your shares to the new trust. a trust controlled solely by me. It is all gone. Elena, the penthouse, the accounts, the stocks. It is all protected. 2 burly security guards flanked me. I recognized one of them. I had given him a Christmas bonus last year. Now, he wouldn't look me in the eye as he gripped my elbow. "Please, Mrs. Sterling," the guard muttered. "Do not make us drag you. It is Ms. Vance." I spat, ripping my arm away, though they immediately seized me again. They marched me through the lobby I had designed, past the intricate mosaics I had hand-selected in Italy. They pushed me through the revolving doors and onto the wet pavement of Fifth Avenue. The heavy glass doors locked behind me. I stood there in the freezing rain, shivering in my evening gown. Through the glass, I could see the warm golden glow of the party. I saw Julian put his hand on the small of Bella's back, guiding her toward the photographers. He had not just cheated on me. He had orchestrated a coup. The necklace was not just a gift, it was a victory flag. I looked down at my empty hands. No coat, no phone, no company. I had spent 15 years building a fortress for the Sterling family, and tonight, they had locked the gates and left me to die in the cold. But as the rain washed away my perfect makeup, clarity pierced through the shock. They thought they had taken everything. They were wrong. The declined sound of the credit card terminal was a noise I would never forget. It was sharp, final, and humiliating. I stood at the front desk of the budget hotel where I had spent the first night after the gala, wearing the same wrinkled emerald gown, while the clerk looked at me with open suspicion. "I am sorry, ma'am," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "It says card seized by issuer. Do you have another form of payment?" I checked my mobile banking app. A red banner flashed across the screen. "Account frozen due to investigation." Julian had moved faster than I thought possible. In my wallet, I had exactly $42 in cash. That was my entire net worth. When I tried to go back to the penthouse to retrieve my clothes, the codes had been changed. The doorman, a man whose daughter's college tuition I had helped pay for, refused to open the gate. He looked at his shoes and mumbled that Mr. Sterling had given strict orders regarding trespassers. I was not a resident anymore. I was a trespasser in the home I had decorated. I had to move to the South Bronx. I found a studio apartment that smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarette smoke for $800 a month. It was the only place that would take cash up front without a credit check. The silence of my soundproofed penthouse was replaced by the constant screaming of sirens and the thumping bass from the neighbor's unit through paper-thin walls. My view of Central Park was gone, replaced by a brick wall and a fire escape rusting into oblivion. I reached out to the circle of friends I had cultivated over a decade. I called Cynthia, a woman who had cried on my shoulder during her divorce. She answered on the third ring. Her voice hushed. "Elena, please do not call me again," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Arthur Sterling made it clear that anyone aiding you is, well, an enemy of the firm. My husband does business with them. I am sorry." The line went dead. One by one, the doors slammed shut. No one wanted to cross the Sterlings. Survival became a matter of simple mathematics. I pawned my diamond stud earrings, the only jewelry I had been wearing that night besides my wedding ring, which I refused to sell out of spite. The pawnbroker gave me $600 for stones worth $5,000. I took the money without arguing because I needed to eat. I still had my portfolio, so I applied to every architectural firm in the city. I secured an interview with a mid-sized firm in Brooklyn. I walked in with my head held high, ready to discuss structural integrity and design philosophy. The hiring manager, a man I had met at conferences, did not even look at my portfolio. "We cannot hire you, Ms. Vance," he said bluntly. "The word is out. Sterling Developments is filing charges for embezzlement. They say you had a mental break, that you are a liability." "That is a lie," I said, gripping the edge of his desk. "I built that company." He shrugged. "In this town. Truth is whatever Arthur Sterling pays for it to be." Go home. Elena. The depression hit me like a physical weight. I spent days lying on a mattress on the floor, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. I was too afraid to spend money on heat, so I slept in my coat. One afternoon, while buying instant noodles at the corner store, I saw a copy of Architectural Digest on the rack. The headline read, "The New Power Couple Redefining the Skyline." Bella was wearing my favorite white dress, one I had left in the closet. I felt a scream building in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Screaming would not pay the rent. I needed money, and I needed to disappear from the world that was hunting me. I walked into a massive construction supply warehouse on the edge of Queens. It was a place where contractors bought lumber and drywall, a place where no one cared about design aesthetics or high society gossip. "I need a job," I told the foreman, a large man with grease on his chin. He looked at my manicured hands, which were already starting to chap from the cold. "We need a stalker for the graveyard shift. Minimum wage, heavy lifting. You look like you might break in half." "I can do it," I said. "Please, just give me a chance." He hired me on the spot. That night, instead of sipping vintage wine, I was hauling 50-pound boxes of ceramic tiles and stacking bags of cement. My muscles screamed in agony, and blisters formed on my heels. I was the architect who used to command cranes and crews, and now I was the invisible worker moving the raw materials, covered in dust, sweating for $11 an hour. But as I stacked the shelves, hiding in the aisles of gray concrete, I told myself this was just the foundation. I was starting over from the ground up. My hands were becoming unrecognizable. The long, slender fingers that had once drafted the delicate spire of the Chrysler Annex were now raw, calloused, and wrapped in cheap bandages. Every night, after an 8-hour shift hauling pallets of ceramic tile and bags of grout, I came home to my Bronx studio smelling of sawdust and sweat. I sat on the floor, often too tired to even shower, staring at the 3 cardboard boxes that contained the remnants of my life. These boxes were all I had managed to salvage from the office before security escorted me out. One rainy Tuesday, seeking distraction from the gnawing hunger in my stomach, I opened the oldest box. It was filled with university textbooks and early sketches. At the very bottom, buried under a stack of old architectural magazines, lay a battered black notebook. I picked it up, wiping away a layer of dust. I opened it, and the spine cracked from age. The pages were covered in my frantic handwriting from 16 years ago. It was the genesis of what the world now knew as the Stirling Smart Grid. Back then, I had simply called it the Vance Loop. I traced the faded ink diagrams of the energy redistribution algorithms. I remembered that winter clearly. Julian and I were dating, but not engaged. I had been young, ambitious, and paranoid about my intellectual property, a habit instilled in me by my professor father. I sat up straighter, the fatigue in my muscles momentarily forgotten. I remembered walking into the patent office downtown. I remembered paying the filing fee with money I had saved from waiting tables. I had filed for the patent under my maiden name, Elena Vance. "Wait," I whispered to the empty, silent room, my voice raspy. They never asked me to sign. When I married Julian, the Sterling lawyers had descended like vultures to merge our assets. They transferred the real estate, the bank accounts, the stock portfolios. But had they transferred the specific intellectual property rights of my premarital patents? They had always treated my design work as a pretty little hobby that accidentally made money. They were so arrogant, so absolutely sure that I would be a Sterling until the day I died, that they might have simply overlooked the paperwork. The next morning, I skipped breakfast to save $3. I walked 20 blocks to the public library and paid for a session on their computer. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a sensation I had not felt since the night of the gala, as I navigated to the United States Patent and Trademark Office database. My fingers shook as I typed in the serial number from my notebook. The screen refreshed. Status active. Owner Elena Vance. Assignment history. None. I stared at the glowing monitor until my eyes burned. The smart grid was not Sterling property. It was mine. It had always been mine. And I knew for a fact that the apex, the billion-dollar tower they were about to launch with such fanfare, was entirely dependent on this system to function. The smart grid controlled the high-speed elevators, the climate regulation, the security locks, and the power consumption efficiency that gave the building its green certification. Without my permission to use that software, the apex was just a hollow shell of glass and steel. It was a massive fire hazard. It was illegal to operate. I leaned back in the creaky library chair. A slow, cold smile spread across my face for the first time in weeks. They had taken my home, my reputation, my money, and my husband, but in their greed and haste, they had forgotten to check the foundation. I was not just a discarded wife anymore. I held the kill switch to the crown jewel of the Sterling Empire. I needed a lawyer, but not the kind that lunched at the plaza. I could not afford the retainers of the white shoe firms that I used to hire for Sterling developments. I needed a brawler. I needed someone who hated the establishment as much as I currently did. My search led me to a cramped office above a laundromat in Hell's Kitchen. The sign on the door was peeling, reading simply Marcus Thorne, attorney at law. Marcus had been a rising star at a top firm until he punched a senior partner for burying evidence in a class action lawsuit. He was brilliant, volatile, and permanently blacklisted by the corporate elite. When I walked in, he did not even look up from his takeout noodles. The office was a chaotic graveyard of file boxes and coffee cups. "We are closed," he grunted, his mouth full. "Come back." "Never." "I am not here for a consultation," I said, placing my battered notebook and a stack of photocopied receipts on his desk. "I am here to offer you a cut of a $200 million settlement." Marcus stopped chewing. He looked at my worn coat, my bandaged hands, and then at my face. He let out a dry, mocking laugh. "Lady, you look like you broke into a construction site to steal copper wire. 200 million. You are delusional." "I am Elena Vance," I said, my voice steel, "and I own the operating system for the Apex Tower. The Sterlings stole my company, my house, and my life, but they forgot to steal the patent." He picked up the notebook. His skepticism faded as he flipped through the pages, cross-referencing them with the printouts I had made from the public patent database. Then I slid the second pile of papers toward him. These were copies of old invoices I had salvaged bills for consulting fees and business gifts like the Blue Hope necklace. "Julian thinks these are tax write-offs," I explained. "But if you look at the recipient addresses, they all trace back to shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. He is not just cheating on me, Marcus. He is funneling shareholder money out of the country. It is fraud." Marcus leaned back in his creaky chair, a gleam appearing in his tired eyes. He looked like a wolf catching the scent of blood. "If this patent holds up," he said slowly, tapping the notebook, "Arthur Sterling will have to tear that building down brick by brick or pay you whatever you ask. I want 40% and expenses. 30, I countered, and you buy me a real coffee." We shook hands. The war had begun, but we needed one final piece of evidence, the current schematic specs of the Apex, to prove they were actively using my code. I knew where they were kept in the physical archives of the old Sterling headquarters, a building with less digital security than the new tower. 2 days later, I pulled a cap low over my eyes and zipped up a generic courier jacket. My hands, rough from manual labor, looked the part of a delivery worker perfectly. I walked into the lobby I had designed 10 years ago, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I made it to the mailroom without issue, grabbed a random stack of interoffice envelopes to look busy, and slipped into the archive corridor. I found the file quickly, Project Apex Electrical Schematics. I shoved the blueprints under my jacket. As I turned the corner to leave, the elevator doors opened. Bella stepped out. She was wearing a white cashmere coat and barking orders into her phone. "No, I said I want the orchids to be white, not cream. Is everyone in this city?" "Incompetent." She stopped. She looked right at me. I froze, keeping my head down, clutching the package to my chest. For a second, her eyes narrowed. She recognized something, my posture, perhaps, or the shape of my chin. "You," she said, stepping closer, her voice suspicious. "Do I know you?" My breath caught in my throat. If she raised the alarm, I would be arrested for trespassing and theft. The plan would die right here. Suddenly, a hand gripped my arm. It was Mrs. Higgins, the receptionist who had worked the front desk for 20 years. I had paid for her husband's surgery 3 years ago secretly. "This is just the new courier. Miss Bella." Mrs. Higgins said loudly, steering me toward the exit. "She is a bit slow. I was just showing her the way out." "Come along, dear." Bella wrinkled her nose in disgust and turned back to her phone. "Fine, just get her out of my sight. She smells like sawdust." Mrs. Higgins pushed me through the revolving doors. "Go, Ms. Elena," she whispered, pressing a small candy into my hand. Give them hell. I ran 3 blocks before stopping to breathe. Back in the office, Marcus and I did not file a lawsuit. That would take years. Instead, we drafted a single, lethal document. "This is not a negotiation," Marcus said as he typed the final paragraph. "This is a hostage situation. It was a notice of copyright infringement." It demanded that Sterling Developments immediately cease all use of the smart grid technology, or face federal statutory damages and an immediate injunction to shut down the apex. We printed it on heavy, bonded paper. It was time to deliver the truth. The courier confirmation beeped on my phone at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. Marcus and I sat in his cramped office, surrounded by the smell of stale coffee and old legal briefs, waiting for the fallout. We did not have to wait long. At 10:15, my phone lit up. It was Julian. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then he called again immediately. I answered on the 4th ring, putting him on speaker so Marcus could hear. "Are you insane?" Julian's voice cracked through the tiny speaker, loud enough to vibrate the desk. "I just read this garbage you sent over. A cease and desist demanding $200 million. You have officially lost your mind, Elena. This is extortion." "It is not extortion, Julian," I said, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with his hysteria. "It is a licensing fee for intellectual property you are currently stealing. If you do not wish to pay, you can simply stop using my system." He laughed, a harsh, barking sound that used to make me feel small. "You think you can stop a billion-dollar project with a piece of paper. You are just a bitter, washed-up woman trying to claw back some dignity. If you do not withdraw this legal joke within 1 hour, I will sue you for harassment. I will bury you so deep you will never—" I hung up. I did not need to listen to his threats anymore. I knew his playbook by heart: intimidate, belittle, destroy. By noon, the public humiliation began. Marcus turned his laptop screen toward me. "You made the social media rounds," he said grimly. Monday morning broke with the force of a hurricane. I sat in Marcus's office, watching the newsfeed on his laptop. The headline was bold, black, and impossible to ignore: "The Sterling Empire Built on Theft and Deceit." The article was devastating. It detailed how the billion-dollar Apex Tower was running on stolen technology. It exposed the purchase of the Blue Hope necklace in the Miami penthouse as acts of corporate embezzlement. Within 2 hours of the market opening, Sterling Development stock had plummeted by 35%. The trading floor was in chaos. By noon, a crowd had gathered outside the gleaming glass doors of the Apex. These were not just onlookers, they were environmental activists. They held signs reading "Fake Green" and "Stolen Power." They were all laughing at the crazy ex-wife who thought she could take on the Sterling Empire. But while they were laughing, the document we had sent was landing on other desks specifically, the desks of the venture capital firm funding the Apex. We had carbon copied every major investor on the notice. Risk assessment officers do not find copyright infringement funny. They find it expensive. Around 2 in the afternoon, the mood shifted. My phone stayed silent. But I could imagine the scene inside the Sterling boardroom. Arthur Sterling, a man who checked the price of paperclips, would have started asking questions. He would have demanded the legal team pull the original merger files from 16 years ago, just to mock me, just to prove I was wrong. I pictured the moment the head counsel, a sweaty man named Henderson, had to walk into Arthur's office. I pictured him clearing his throat, terrified. At 4 o'clock, Marcus's office line rang. It was Henderson. Marcus answered, leaning back in his chair with a predatory grin. "Mr. Thorne," Henderson said. His voice was tight, lacking its usual condescending boom. "We have reviewed the claims regarding the smart grid patent." And Marcus asked, spinning a pen between his fingers, "There appears to be a gap in our records," Henderson admitted, the words sounding like they were being dragged out of him. "The transfer of ownership form from Ms. Vance to Sterling Developments seems to be missing." "It is not missing," Marcus said sharply. "It never existed. My client retained sole ownership, which means your entire building management system is operating illegally. We believe we can come to an arrangement," Henderson said quickly, the panic seeping through. "Perhaps a consulting fee. We could offer $50,000 to expedite the paperwork. The price is $200 million, Marcus said. "Or you rip the wiring out of your 60-story tower. You have 48 hours until the grand opening." Tick-tock. He slammed the phone down. We sat in silence for a moment, the gravity of it sinking in. They knew. The Apex was a smart building. It did not have manual overrides for the elevators, the climate control, or the security locks. It all ran on my grid. Without my code, the building was a dark, airless tomb. That evening, my cell phone rang again. It was Julian. The aggression was gone, replaced by a smooth, oily charm that made my skin crawl. "Elena, darling," he said. "Look, things got heated earlier. Dad and I were just talking. We think we should meet. Just the two of us. To talk about old times. And this misunderstanding. It is not a misunderstanding." "Julian," I said, looking at the rain streaking the dirty window. "It is business." "Fine," he snapped, the mask slipping for a second. "Meet me at Le Bernardin. Tonight at 8. We will settle this. I will be there," I said. "Bring your checkbook." I hung up and looked at Marcus. For the first time in months, I did not feel like a victim. "He is scared," Marcus said. "He should be," I replied, standing up and smoothing my cheap thrift store coat. He just realized that the woman he threw out into the rain is holding the remote control to his entire life. Le Bernardin was exactly as I remembered it. The soft lighting, the hushed conversations of the city's power players, and the scent of truffle oil and old money. Julian had chosen Table 12, the secluded corner booth where he had proposed to me 16 years ago. It was a calculated move, designed to trigger nostalgia and soften my resolve. He was wearing his apology suit, a navy charcoal cashmere blend that usually worked on me. Tonight, it just looked like a costume. I sat down without a greeting. Julian signaled the waiter to pour the wine, a vintage Bordeaux that cost more than my monthly rent in the Bronx. "Elena," he started, his voice dripping with synthetic warmth. "I am so glad you came. You look tired. Have you been eating well? Skip the pleasantries." "Julian," I said, unfolding my napkin with deliberate slowness. "You have a deadline. The Apex opens in 48 hours. Why am I here?" He sighed, looking pained, as if my coldness was hurting him deeply. He reached under the table and lifted a heavy leather briefcase, placing it on the pristine white tablecloth. He clicked the latches open just enough for me to see the contents. Rows of neatly stacked $100 bills. "This is $2 million. Elena," he whispered. "Cash. Untraceable. I know things have been hard for you. I want to help. I want you to be comfortable. All you have to do is sign this retroactive intellectual property transfer. Just a signature, and you can walk out of here and start a new life. Somewhere sunny, somewhere far away. I looked at the money. $2 million. It was enough to buy a house, to start a small firm, to never lift a bag of cement again. Then I looked at Julian's eyes. They were not kind, they were calculating. He was not offering me a gift, he was buying my silence. I picked up my spoon and cracked the caramelized sugar of my creme brulee. The sound was sharp in the quiet space. You know, I said, taking a bite of the custard. The vanilla is a bit overpowering tonight. Don't you think Julian's jaw tightened? Elena, did you hear me? $2 million. Do not be stupid. Take the money. I swallowed the dessert and looked him dead in the eye. I do not want your pocket change, Julian. And I certainly do not want money that you stole. He froze. Excuse me, I know about the other gifts, I said, keeping my voice low and conversational. I know about the shell company in the Cayman Islands called Blue Horizon. I know you siphoned $4 million out of the Sterling construction budget to buy a penthouse in Miami, and I know the deed is under the name Bella Rossi. Julian's face drained of color, his hands clenched into fists on the table. You have been evading federal taxes and embezzling from your own shareholders to fund your mistress's lifestyle, I continued, enjoying the look of pure terror in his eyes. That is 15 years in federal prison, Julian. Not just for you, but for your father too. If he signed off on those audits. The charm vanished instantly. Julian leaned across the table, his teeth bared in a snarl. The vein in his forehead pulsed. You listen to me, you bitch, he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, you will regret it. I will bury you. I have friends who can make a lonely woman in the Bronx disappear without a trace. Do you understand? You take this money, or you die. I didn't flinch. I simply smiled and pointed a spoon over his shoulder. Julian, look at table 4. The gentleman in the gray jacket. Julian turned around slowly. 3 tables away. Marcus sat facing us. He was sipping an espresso. Pinned to his lapel was a small, blinking device. When he saw Julian turn, Marcus raised his coffee cup in a mock toast and tapped the camera. Say hello to the cloud, I said. Marcus has been live streaming this entire conversation to a secure server. We have the bribery attempt. We have the admission of the shell companies. And we have a death threat against a witness. Julian looked like he was going to vomit. He scrambled to close the briefcase, his fingers fumbling with the latches. I stood up, smoothing down my thrift store coat. I dropped a $10 bill on the table, my share of the dessert. The price is not $2 million anymore, I told him, looking down at the man I had once loved. In fact, I do not want your money at all. I want the truth. I want a public admission of what you did. You have 24 hours. I walked out of the restaurant, leaving him sitting there with his bribe and his fear. According to the grapevine, Julian went straight to Bella's apartment that night. He was in a panic, terrifying and violent. He accused her of being loose with her information, of leading me to the trail. Neighbors reported screaming and the sound of breaking glass. Bella, who had thought she was marrying a prince, was finally meeting the real Julian Sterling. The cracks in their perfect facade were starting to show, and I was just getting started. We decided that silence was no longer a strategy. It was a liability. We needed to control the narrative before the Sterlings could spin their own version of the truth. On Sunday night, Marcus and I met with a senior investigative journalist from the New York Chronicle in a dim diner in Queens. I handed over everything: the patent registration, the timeline of the theft, and the stack of receipts for the so-called business gifts that were actually funneling shareholder money into Bella's pockets. Monday morning broke with the force of a hurricane. I sat in Marcus's office, watching the news feed on his laptop. The headline was bold, black, and impossible to ignore: the Sterling Empire built on theft and deceit. The article was devastating. It detailed how the billion-dollar Apex Tower was running on stolen technology. It exposed the purchase of the Blue Hope necklace and the Miami penthouse as acts of corporate embezzlement. Within 2 hours of the market opening, Sterling Development stock had plummeted by 35%. The trading floor was in chaos. By noon, a crowd had gathered outside the gleaming glass doors of the Apex. These were not just onlookers, they were environmental activists. They held signs reading "Fake Green and Stolen Power." They understood what the shareholders did not if I pulled the kill switch on the smart grid. The building's vaunted energy efficiency would vanish, turning it into an ecological disaster. The police were trying to hold back the line, but the image of protesters clashing with security in front of the unopened building was broadcasting live to the world. Inside the Sterling boardroom, the cannibalism had begun. According to our insider sources, Arthur Sterling did not hesitate to protect the crown. At 2 o'clock, the company issued a press release. It was cold and clinical. It stated that Julian Sterling was being removed from his position as CEO effective immediately pending an internal investigation. Arthur had thrown his own son to the wolves to save the stock price, but Julian was not ready to go down quietly. At 4 o'clock, Marcus received an urgent email from the Sterling legal team. Attached was a scanned document. "Look at this," Marcus said, his voice dripping with disbelief. They found a miracle. It was an intellectual property transfer agreement, dated 6 years ago. At the bottom was a signature that looked remarkably like mine. The document claimed that I had gifted the Vance loop patent to the company for the sum of $1. "He forged it," I said, looking at the shaky ink on the screen. "He is desperate. He is also stupid," Marcus replied, picking up the phone. Julian had made a fatal error. He assumed that because I was poor, I was unprepared. But I knew Julian better than anyone. I knew that when he was cornered, he lied. I knew he would try to fabricate evidence to invalidate my claim. That was why, exactly 7 days ago, I had gone to a court-certified forensic document examiner. I had submitted samples of my signature from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and today, we had filed a preemptive affidavit with the court stating that no transfer documents existed and that any document appearing after the date of my firing should be treated as a probable forgery. Marcus put the call through to Henderson, the Sterling lawyer. "Mr. Henderson," Marcus said, his voice booming, "I am looking at this document you just sent. Before you submit this to a judge, I suggest you look at the forensic affidavit we filed last week regarding my client's signature history. If you file this forgery, I will not just sue for copyright infringement. I will have your license disbarred for submitting falsified evidence, and I will have Julian Sterling arrested for fraud by dinner time." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, we heard the sound of papers being shuffled frantically. There seems to have been a mistake," Henderson stammered, his voice trembling. "Mr. Sterling provided this document just now. We were not aware of its provenance. We are withdrawing it immediately." "I thought so," Marcus said. I leaned back in my chair. Julian had tried to frame me, and in doing so, he had handed us the final nail for his coffin. He was no longer just an adulterer and a bad businessman. He was now a criminal who had tried to deceive the court. "He is done," I said softly. "Not yet," Marcus corrected me, pointing to the television screen where the breaking news banner was flashing. "Arthur is still standing, and he is not going to let the Apex stay dark without a fight." The adrenaline kicked in the moment I put my key in the lock. It turned too easily. I had double-locked the deadbolt this morning, but now it was open. I pushed the door ajar with my boot, my heart hammering against my ribs. Inside, my tiny Bronx apartment had been turned upside down. The mattress was slashed, the drawers dumped out, and my boxes of files were scattered across the floor. A man dressed in black stepped out of the shadows of the kitchenette. He was holding a crowbar. "Where is the notebook?" he growled, his voice muffled by a ski mask. "The boss said you have the original—" Julian. He had finally snapped. He was not sending lawyers anymore. He was sending thugs. "I do not have it," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It is with my lawyer." "Liar," he shouted, lunging at me. I did not scream. I did not freeze. I moved. I knew this apartment better than he did. I knew that the floorboard near the radiator was rotted through, covered only by a cheap rug. I sidestepped sharply to the left. The intruder, moving with heavy, aggressive momentum, stepped right onto the weak spot. There was a sickening crack. His leg went through the floor up to his knee, trapping him in the jagged wood and subflooring. He howled in pain and dropped the crowbar, the metal clanging loudly against the linoleum. "You bitch!" he screamed, thrashing to pull his leg free. I did not wait. I bolted out the door, slamming it shut and jamming my key into the lock from the outside. I twisted it until the deadbolt clicked home, trapping him inside my broken sanctuary. I ran down the hallway, dialing 911 as I sprinted down the stairs. Police. I gasped into the phone. There is an intruder in my apartment. I have him trapped. By the time the police dragged him out in handcuffs, he was ready to talk. He was a low-level criminal with no loyalty. In the interrogation room, he admitted that he had been hired by a man named Kevin, who turned out to be Julian's personal executive assistant. The instructions had come directly from Julian. Get the notebook, destroy the evidence, hurt her if you have to. An arrest warrant was issued for Julian Sterling within the hour for conspiracy to commit burglary and assault. But when the police arrived at his penthouse, he was gone. His passport was missing. My husband, the golden boy of New York real estate, was now a fugitive on the run. That evening, the drama shifted to the television screens. Bella appeared on a primetime interview program. She was wearing a modest gray sweater, looking pale and tearful, a stark contrast to the arrogant girl in the convertible. "I had no idea," Bella sobbed into the camera, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "I was a victim too. Julian manipulated me. I am just a 24-year-old girl. I did not know about the stolen money or the patent. I thought he loved me. It was a brilliant performance." The public began to soften. They saw a naive young woman caught in a billionaire's web. I turned off the volume on the TV in the police station waiting room. "Marcus," I said, "release the files." 10 minutes later, we uploaded the documents to social media and sent them to every news outlet in the city. First, the receipt for the Blue Hope necklace, dated 3 days before the gala, with a delivery note signed by Bella. Second, and more damning, was the property deed for the Miami penthouse. It was purchased with funds transferred from a Sterling shell company, but the owner of record was clearly listed Bella Rossi. The caption I wrote was simple. She did not just know. She cashed the checks. The internet exploded. The sympathy for Bella evaporated instantly. She was not a victim. She was a co-conspirator in money laundering. Comments flooded in, calling for her arrest. In the span of an evening, the narrative flipped completely. I was no longer the scorned ex-wife seeking revenge. I was the survivor who had outsmarted a criminal empire. People were painting murals of my face in Brooklyn. They called me the Iron Architect. I sat on the hard plastic chair of the precinct, watching the news ticker scroll my name, and realized I was not afraid of Julian anymore. He was running from me. Arthur Sterling was a gambler, and he decided to bluff with the highest stakes of his life. Despite the protests, the plunging stock prices, and the public outrage, he refused to cancel the grand opening of the Apex. He was betting everything on the assumption that I did not have the nerve to destroy my own creation. On the morning of the launch, a courier delivered a gold-embossed envelope to my tiny apartment in the Bronx. It was an invitation to the gala, designating me as a guest of honor. It was a trap, of course. He wanted me there, in front of the cameras, to force me into a smiling submission. I accepted. I spent the very last of the money Marcus and I had scraped together on a dress. I chose crimson red silk, a color that screamed danger and vitality. When I stepped out of the hired car in front of the Apex, the crowd went silent. I was no longer the shivering woman in the rain or the worker in the warehouse. I was the architect returning to her masterpiece. The flashbulbs erupted like a lightning storm. I walked the red carpet with my head high, ignoring the shouted questions from reporters, and entered the lobby. The interior was magnificent. The smart grid was humming perfectly, regulating the temperature to a comfortable 72 degrees, controlling the ambient lighting to complement the sunset outside. Arthur was waiting for me near the podium. He looked 10 years older than he had last week, his skin gray and papery, but his eyes were still vicious. He grabbed my hand for a handshake that was more of a vice grip, smiling tightly for the cameras. "You look healthy," Arthur muttered through his teeth, leaning in close so only I could hear. "Listen to me carefully, Elena. If you do anything to embarrass this family tonight, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you end up in a federal prison. I will plant evidence. I will buy judges. Do not test me." I did not pull my hand away. I leaned in and whispered back into his ear, "I am not here to negotiate, Arthur, and I am certainly not here to save your reputation. I am here to take back what is mine." Arthur stiffened, his eyes darting around the room nervously. He opened his mouth to call for security, but a sudden commotion at the revolving doors stopped him. A man burst into the lobby, shoving past the doormen. He was wearing a dirty trench coat, his hair was matted, and a thick, patchy beard covered his face. It took me a moment to realize it was Julian. He looked wild, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. He had been hiding in the city, living like a rat, and the stress had broken him. "You," Julian screamed, his voice cracking. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You did this, you witch. You took everything from me." The crowd gasped and parted as he charged toward me. He looked ready to kill. Arthur stood frozen in shock, but the private security team moved instantly. 2 guards tackled Julian just feet away from me. He hit the marble floor with a sickening thud, thrashing and screaming obscenities. "It is my building," Julian howled as they pinned his arms behind his back. "She is a thief. She is a liar. I am the CEO. Let me go. Please, let me go." The cameras were rolling, broadcasting live to millions of viewers. The facade of the Sterling family was crumbling in real time. I stood perfectly still in my red dress, watching the man who had once sworn to protect me being dragged away like a common criminal. I felt nothing for him. No pity, no love, just a cold sense of closure. I looked at the digital clock mounted above the reception desk. The numbers flipped. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. The deadline I had set in the legal notice had just expired. I looked at Arthur, who was staring at his son in horror. "Time is up," I said softly. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. The Kill Switch app was open on the screen, a single red button pulsating against the black background. I pressed the digital button on my screen. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. The low, expensive hum of the climate control system died. The 60-foot crystal chandeliers overhead flickered once and went black. The high-speed elevators froze between floors. The apex, a billion-dollar cathedral of light and technology, plunged into immediate, suffocating darkness. The only illumination came from the thousands of camera flashes popping like strobe lights in the gloom, capturing the exact moment the Sterling Empire died. Outside, the massive LED billboard that wrapped around the building's facade shifted. The glowing gold Sterling logo vanished. In its place, blazing in stark white letters against a red background for all of Manhattan to see, was a message I had programmed weeks ago: "System critical failure. Property of Elena Vance. Disabled due to intellectual property theft." Inside the ballroom, panic erupted. The screams of socialites mixed with the shouting of security guards. Investors who had been sipping champagne seconds ago were now scrambling toward the exits, their phones lighting up their terrified faces as they checked stock tickers. Sterling Developments was in free fall. The stock was not just dropping, it was evaporating. "What did you do?" Arthur Sterling roared, grabbing my arm in the dark. "Turn it back on." "You are destroying us." "I am not doing anything, Arthur," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I am simply taking back my property. You built your castle on my land, and now I am evicting you." Before he could threaten me again, the heavy doors of the ballroom were forced open. A squad of NYPD officers, guided by tactical flashlights, marched into the chaos. They were not there to save the party. They headed straight for Julian, who was still thrashing in the grip of the private security team. "Julian Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault, burglary, and wire fraud," an officer announced, his voice booming. As they handcuffed Julian, Marcus stepped out of the shadows. He looked like a shark smelling blood. He walked straight up to Arthur, who was watching his son being dragged away. "Arthur Sterling," Marcus said, handing a warrant to the stunned tycoon. "This is for you: securities fraud, obstruction of justice, and aiding and abetting. But right now, you have a bigger problem. This building is effectively a brick. It is worthless. Unless—" "Unless what?" Arthur wheezed, clutching his chest. "Unless you transfer the deed of the Apex to its rightful owner," Marcus said, shining his flashlight onto a document he had pulled from his jacket. "As a settlement for damages. You sign it over now, and Elena restores the power. You refuse, and you go to prison bankrupt instead of just going to prison rich." Arthur looked around the dark, screaming room. He looked at the investors fleeing, the police swarming, and the ruin of his legacy. He looked at me, standing calm and composed in my red dress. He realized he had lost before the game even started. "Give me the pen," Arthur whispered, his voice broken. Using Marcus's phone as a light, Arthur Sterling signed the papers. His hand shook so violently the signature was barely legible, but it was legal. He dropped the pen and slumped against the wall, a defeated old man. I took the document. I felt the weight of the paper, heavier than any brick I had ever carried in the warehouse. "Get him out of here," I told the officers. As they led Arthur away, they marched Julian past me. He stopped for a second, the strobe lights illuminating his wild, tear-stained face. He looked at the document in my hand, then up at my face. He saw the woman he had called old and useless standing as the owner of the greatest skyscraper in New York. "Elena," he choked out, the word sounding like a plea. "Please." "Goodbye, Julian," I said. I looked down at my phone. I entered the override code. System reboot initiated. With a thunderous hum, the power surged back. The chandeliers blazed to life, flooding the room with brilliant, golden light. The air conditioning kicked in, breathing life back into the tower. The crowd went silent, staring at me. I stood alone in the center of the ballroom, bathed in the glow of my own creation. I was no longer a wife. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of my own destiny, and I was finally home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on whether Julian and Arthur got what they deserved. If you enjoyed this journey of justice, please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.